Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Lead That panel. This is like great today because we have like a great session on how feedback loop fail and how to fix them. This is a Lead Dev online panel discussion created with partnership with Octopus Deploy. Discussion will roughly take 45 minutes, I think, give or take. After we're gonna move into Slack. So if you're interested and you have some follow-up question, please join me and the panelists in Slack. There is like a panel Q&A channel, so you can easily get there. And if we have time, hopefully we can also answer some question online. So there is a Q&A functionality in Zoom. Feel free to use it and post your message. If it's relevant to the current topic, I'll pick it up immediately. If not, we're gonna try to do it at the end. If not, we're gonna respond in the channel. So it's gonna be you will have your answer, don't worry. And let me start with some intro. So my name is Simone, and I'm a head of engineering at a company called Kraken. And today I'll join by like an incredible list of panelists. I had a very exciting discussion with them the other day. Steve, Francine. So I'll shut up and I'll let them introduce themselves. So Steve, you are on my right. So do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Steve Fenton, and I am a DevRel and researcher at Octopus Deploy and a member of the Dora community, which is Google's research arm. And yeah, I'm super excited to be talking about pipelines today.
Awesome. Ren.
Hey everyone, I'm Rin Daniels. I'm the tech lead of the cloud platform team at Mapbox, and I am based out of Helsinki, Finland.
Nice. And Francine.
Hi everyone, I'm Francine Pilot. Quickly describing myself here, I'm a white woman, long dark brown hair, wearing a black t-shirt, and I'm a lead software engineer at Nubank, working on the CI/CD platform that supports our engineer teams to building reliable pipelines and deploying at scale. I'm really happy to join the conversation today.
And we are too. We are too 100%. So let's give the audience a bit of a context. So this is how we decided to frame the conversation, and then I'm gonna have space for the panelists to chime in. There is a lot of content to cover, I think. So when we talk about delivery problem, in my mind, we often default to process and people. The kind of comment you get in the room are, we need better planning, we need more discipline. You may hear the old school, we need more engineers, or the engineer are not working hard enough. But in reality, also a lot of delivery dysfunction are systemic and not necessarily about what I described, and are inside what we call our feedback loop, our ability to learn how far we are from where we want to go. And example are, if your build takes 40 minutes, when the tests are failing, when deployment is painful, or even when some of the metrics are misleading, if we talk about customer feedback, then team tend to adapt. They adjust the fact that there are things that are a bit shit. Sorry for the S word. And those adaptations are often rational. It kind of makes sense. But I think in the long term, they are going to cost the company quite a lot of money. So today I would love us to explore where feedback loops normally break down. What are the quick fixes that create some structural drag? Let's go structural. I like structural drag. And what modern engineering leaders can do systematically, not just procedurally, to restore, let's call it flow. So this is roughly what I want to talk about. And I think I cannot not start from thinking about feedback loop. So Steve, we talked about this, so I wanted your take on it. When you think about feedback loop in delivery, what are the most overlooked ones? Where do teams misunderstand what a feedback loop is?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I think if we were going to be really hardcore about it, we'd probably say there's one real feedback loop, right? If you ask me to make you a sandwich, until I give you that sandwich and you take a bite, we don't know if I've actually made something that you want to eat, right? But we also know that sometimes takes too long. Like if I make a small code change and then I have to wait for a customer to tell me, then I'm going to be kind of like behind the curve. So the idea is the feedback loops really ought to be ways of us discovering earlier something that we would eventually discover. So the reason we do testing is because, I remember when I first started in my career, we would put a version out and people would say, I can't even log into this version. Right. And so we're kind of getting really low quality feedback from that big real feedback loop. So we've tried to create tighter and tighter loops inside to try and get earlier sight of things and to make sure that what eventually comes out and that customers bite into tastes good. But I think probably one of the biggest mistakes is mistaking those intermediate pieces of feedback for someone being delighted with the sandwich.
This is brilliant. I wish I had the love emoji to spark in the conversation. I love the metaphors. Thank you so much.
Sorry if I've made everyone hungry.
Someone else want to jump in to have their own take on feedback loop, and if you see it differently or similarly?
Yes, I'd like to add something here. It's about the developer experience also. I think that what I think in practice, like when we tend to focus on build success or deployment status, we cannot ignore how takes to get feedback and how actionable it is. And just to picture what I'm trying to say is once I worked on a pipeline where just cloning the repository was taking over 4 minutes. And it has been normalized. Nobody was questioning it. Just people just wait for it to finish. And then what Steve said about get to the customer and waiting for someone to taste it, but we can just tight this little space in the pipeline, the little step by maybe just changing why the cloning strategy is used, like doing a shallow clone. And in this particular case, we drop to 26 seconds. So it goes to the 4 to 26 seconds. So I think we can not just improve the performance and maybe help how people during the workday are changing and are working, and the green check is not exactly the health feedback loop. If it is just too slow, we need to improve it and pay attention on those things.
Yeah, this is super crucial because when I'm working on the actual code part of the problem, I don't want to have to pause and wait to get that inner loop feedback. I kind of want that to be instant because otherwise my brain starts to let go of all of this model that I've built and what I'm doing and the stages. So yeah, I don't want to wait like 40 seconds to do a kind of clone. I don't want to wait like 20 minutes for a build to complete. It's just too long for me to keep in that flow.
Interesting. Basically, what you're saying is that obviously Steve started by saying, well, this is the feedback loop is the one with the customer. But then Francine point of view is like, well, the feedback loop of the engineers also matter. It's kind of like they get. So it's super interesting. And what you mentioned a bit, Francine, but I wonder if someone else has, I don't know, for example, Ren, I think I would love your take on this. What are the most common form of pipeline friction that the team normalize? So Francine mentioned one for sure, but are actually those sign or signal of a deeper issue or of deeper issues in your mind?
I think probably the biggest one that I've seen, or the most common one that I've seen, is the tests that are flaky, where, oh yeah, it failed that time, just run it again, it'll succeed the second time. We don't know why. Nobody's ever had the time to really dig into it, because at least on practically every engineering team that I've ever worked on, there's never enough time and there's always something that's higher priority. So when you have these little annoyances, like the little paper cuts, like, you know, the build that's just a few seconds too long, or the tests that are flaky every so often, it's not enough of a priority to like, all right, stop the line, let's dig in and really figure out what's going on. But just these little annoyances that you never really notice until somebody new joins your team, and then you have to explain them to somebody and you're like, ooh, that's kind of embarrassing. Why didn't we fix that? So I think it can be really important, especially when we're talking about these internal feedback loops, to just think about ways of capturing that information. And one thing that I like to do is like do a team hack week every so often, where you prioritize fixing those things that nobody's had time or priority to fix before.
Yeah, and the number one fix for flaky tests is that people just comment them out. Like, and I don't have any actual research or evidence for that, but I've opened up a lot of code bases where there's lots of tests that are just commented out. And it's always because they kept on kind of flip-flopping between green and red, and it was just too much effort to try and fix it. So yeah, that resonates. I think that's a major problem.
So then it sounds like that what you're saying is slow and flaky are the two main common.
Or just less useful. Like one thing I've also seen is an ongoing drift between, a staging and a production environment, where ideally those are pretty similar. So if you deploy something to staging, it's probably going to work the same way in production, but then drift happens and you end up with the same sort of thing where you lose confidence in the system. It's not doing what it's supposed to do, which can also, the loop is giving you incorrect feedback. So it's not doing its job there.
Yeah, I've seen a problem that happens quite a lot where the developers will automate their deployments to dev and test, but then there's a more traditional ops team that wants to do the production deployment. And so you then end up in a situation where you get this confidence, dev worked fine, test worked fine, and then the production deployment doesn't work because it's not done in the same way that the dev and test deployments were done. So that's a really common problem, and I've hit that so many times in my career, where we've solved the problem but can't complete that all the way into production. It only takes a tick box to be missed. I worked on one application where they did the whole checklist apart from double clicking on the installer, so there was actually no software installed as part of their whole deployment process. So, yeah, you kind of need to make sure your environments are reasonably similar. If you use load balancing in production and you're not using load balancing in test, you're going to find little things like, oh, we were using session state, and as I move to a different server, the session state's not there. Oops, we should have used our Redis cache or whatever. So yeah, you kind of want to have that similarity all the way through. And if you're changing your process for deployments, you want to make sure that it follows the same path to production. We're really good now at making sure my code change goes to dev and then to test and then to production. But sometimes we change our deployment process. We're like, oh, when we deploy to test, we miss something. We'll update the process for it, or we'll change how it works. And then the next deployment you do is production on this process you've never even used before. It's like the first time you've used it. So you kind of want to flow that through the same path. Like, oh, the process didn't work. We'll update the process, then we'll deploy to dev again, and then to test. And now we've tested our process twice, as well as the application.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I have a bit of a spicy take here, so I'll put it down, right? I've seen so many teams spending. I was going to say wasting, but maybe it's too strong. So much time trying to make a staging equal to production instead of a building capability to allow them to actually test where it really matters. That is the production environment. And so I wonder if other people have this. Anyway, this is what we do at Kraken. We don't have a staging environment, and we try to deploy in a way that is safe in production, so that we can do some testing there, and then we're allowed to other clients. I'm wondering how much is this something you explored as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, my view on that is that it should be the same shape as production, your staging environment, but it can be miniature, right? So you probably don't need to have your full spec of everything running. But if you're doing things like load balancing, or if you have caches and things like that, you want all of that stuff to be there in miniature and to be cheap. And ideally, easy to set up with automation. I think we're past the point where we want to be click opsing our environments, because they're like 5 minutes later, you have a completely different environment to what you expected because things change so rapidly. So we want to automate those environments and we want to have them in miniature. But we also know that testing itself is miniature. We might run 1,000 tests, but then when we put our software live, there's like, it's not going to be 1,000 people using it. It could be millions of people using it, and they do all kinds of things we can't anticipate. And so we need to, that's where that observability of what's happening in production becomes so useful, because users create ideas of how to use your software that you never anticipated, and it can make it go wrong, you know.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm wondering, no one has, said the M word yet. That is metrics, and I'm surprised because it come out after 30 seconds normally. So, so instead of you asking the usual question, I want to ask like a contrarian question. It is, where do measurement, of system actually distort feedback instead of improving it? Is there like some situation, some scenario where actually sometimes I do a disservice more than helping? Steve, I know you seem eager. Let's go with you.
I always try, when metrics comes up, I always try to pause for a minute because I know I get overexcited about the subject of metrics. There's loads of really positive things from metrics. Mostly it's the fact that when we measure something, it can prove us wrong and we can learn counterintuitive things. Lots of good stuff. But there's also a flip side to it that, I mean, a good example would be we've kind of established quite firmly about throughput and stability in the DORA research. So we know that deploying more often, having shorter change lead times, these are all good things. But also, we've all used software on our phones, and when it nags us every day to say there's a new version of this app, it's actually irritating, right? So if we just take the metrics in isolation, we want to deploy as often as possible, but we're not listening to the users and being close to the users, we can create situations like that where, like, I have some apps that I've seriously considered just deleting the app because I'm so fed up with being told every day there's an update for it. It's a burden on me as a user. So metrics don't always give you the complete picture. And, I think there are some famous quotes from past leaders, if you go into that Drucker and Deming space, there's a huge amount of stuff that we can't effectively measure, and human judgment is needed. So don't just depend on metrics.
I was actually going to say something very similar, that these days it feels like you can come up with metrics for anything, but you need to be careful that you're measuring the right thing. And I think, what you said, Steve, about like the end user experience and, your phone nagging you like, oh yeah, I've done the same thing. And I think we can get so bogged down in the metrics, to steal your sandwich metaphor. We can be like, okay, we got to make sure that we are getting the cheese on that sandwich really, really fast. And you get so focused on that particular metric that you forget that you're supposed to be serving burritos instead of sandwiches. And people can get really kind of rabbit holed into, let's make sure that the metrics look good, because oftentimes, that can be how your team gets headcount, or you get a bigger budget as if you meet your metrics. So you got to make sure you're meeting your metrics, but ultimately we're not doing what we're doing in order to make the numbers on a graph do a certain thing. We are trying to solve problems for people. And so it's really important to keep that in mind and not just focus on the metrics.
I would add that an example, by setting a strict goal like commit and go to a stage environment in X minutes is not a good method at all, because when people try to achieve those goals or pursuing it is like by maybe removing tests and reducing validation to reach the number. And I think it's not just what we want to do. We want to go to safely deployments. We have this healthy loop inside of all the circle.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like if you want that deployment to be super fast, just delete all the tests. Hooray. Yeah, you can see people doing that. And if you actually think about the outcomes you're expecting, you kind of, yes, you still want to try and get feedback to the developer really quickly, so they know if they've broken something, they're almost like, I know which line of code I've just done that's caused this. So I know exactly where to look. Pinpointing cost of 0. But if you have longer running tests, that's fine too, right? After you've given some feedback to the developers, you carry on doing more tests, you run some tests in parallel. But yeah, you wouldn't want to reduce the valuable steps, you know. And what happens if we do that? We remove the test automation, but now we need to have a actual like manual testing phase that's much longer. So,
Mm,
you know, we're robbing ourselves, I think, if we do that.
yeah. Um, mm. I'm worried that if we continue on metrics, we may spend all day speaking about metrics. But I think I totally agree with what you're saying. You know, like if I give an example, I used to be in a platform team where the goal was to reduce 30% of the, you know, like the requests from people using the platform. And I used to joke around that like a very good way would be to delete the Slack channel where we would get a request. You know, it will certainly improve the metrics, but it wouldn't achieve the goal. And the reason is because some metrics are lagging. You're gonna find out only when you know, when things are happen. That it's a bit too late to navigate if you're doing the right direction or not. And it is extremely hard to find a leading metrics that help you figure out if you go in direction. So, but I'm gonna pause on metric because I think we may gonna be too excited about it and move to something else. I wanted to touch base with you all. So I want to go back to what something we said before. That is like another systemic issue. Why do teams tolerate broken feedback loops for so long? Why don't they fix them earlier? There is certainly a problem that I'm feeling at times myself. So, Francine, what do you think? What's your take?
I think that people get used to them. It's something always have been slow. People stop questioning and just become how things works. And I think there's also some kind of roadmap pressure because making improvements in pipelines and looking for the feedback loop feels like doing some internal work, and the internal work will not give the visible progress in the roadmap. So it will get deprioritized. And as a like a platform engineer, I would say that another factor is that there's not clear ownership about it. And this usually cross boundaries like the code, the platform, the infrastructure. So there's no single team that feels fully responsible for it. And what some think that I've seen is when there is this bunch of pull requests that are opened by bots, like these bots that will bump library versions or do some little things in the code. And sometimes this pull request will fail with a linter issue. And in that point, there's this kind of manually approach that a person needs to pull the branch locally, fix the linter error, commit, push, ask for a pull request and review again, and then merge the pair. Merge the pair. I think this is repetitive. And this is something that in my experience, I pass it through. And what we solve it or improve the feedback loop in this case because the system was giving the feedback, the link failed. So something that I've done is instead of keeping the manual process, we introduce a small automation when a comment in a pull request with a command that will trigger the pipeline will run the lint fix command, commit the change, and update the pull request automatically. So the person could always review again the pull request and merge it without the need of doing the manual work again. So I think this is people will tolerate these broken feedback loops because the system is still functions, but is just inefficient.
Is it like similar to the principle of like make it easy to do the right next action or something like that? Is that on this page?
Yeah.
There's an element of that, I think. Yeah. I kind of feel that humans have this built-in mechanism. Like when we put our clothes on, our brain knows to stop telling us we're wearing clothes. so that we don't go around all day thinking, oh, I'm wearing clothes, right? It's like they're rubbing on us and they're there, but our brain just goes, you don't need to know about that. And I think that same mechanism can work when we've got flaky tests or the build's taken a bit too long or humans are having to intervene in what should be automated pull requests. So I think there's something very like Bronze Age about that part of our brain.
I think also there can be just competing priorities where the team just has too much to do, or, it's not the shiny feature work that is gonna, look really good on a slide deck somewhere, and it's just hard to justify, yeah, we're gonna, stop building new stuff for customers and go fix the builds. Like that's not glamorous and shiny, so people, even if they want to do it, they aren't necessarily getting, the approval from managers or above, that level up higher, to be able to do those things. I think one thing that can be really interesting is, ask the engineers on the team, like, if you could wave a magic wand and fix one thing, what would it be? And then really listen to those results, because I think a lot of times people do, like, yeah, there is definitely a normalization of deviance, of just like we forget the friction when it's there every day. But I think there's also a lot that is like, oh, I would love to do that. Maybe I'll wait until, nobody's looking, and then just, the day when everyone, like, working in Europe with an American team, the day of Thanksgiving and the day after is when I'm like, I'm gonna go fix the builds because nobody's around to tell me not to.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to celebrate those things more as well. Like we don't pop champagne corks when we make builds better and when we make deployments better and when our observability is telling us things before a customer knows about it. We need to start popping champagne for those as well.
I'll tell you something that I started doing in January. Maybe it's useful to others. I started doing like a tackle lens for my department, where I, on purpose, mostly asked to show and case things that basically like I care about. So at the moment, I care about improve operability. I care about like systemic architecture changes that allow us to be more efficient and so on. So basically, I cherry pick and I say, teams, I want to just talk about this stuff. It doesn't mean the other stuff, it doesn't have to be listened to, right? Just that there are other avenues where we have a lot of champagne popping for those stuff. So it's a way to normalize that there is some groundwork that maybe it's not celebrated enough, but when it does, it pay off a huge amount. So that's something that is working quite well in case it's something that you're interested in implementing. But let me. Rin, given that you kind of mentioned it, so I wanted to go a bit deeper on this one. Ren, sorry. If you are an engineering manager and you build are slow, but you have a roadmap pressure, how do you actually justify investing in pipeline improvement? So you mentioned it. You mentioned the pain, but tell me more about what you think about the solution could be.
Yeah. I think in a lot of it'll depend based on what your org values, but if we talk about metrics again, a lot of companies love metrics, and especially if you're trying to justify this to the higher ups, they care about the metrics that have dollar signs in front of them. So if you're able to put together something that says like, hey, we've spent, X number of hours waiting for slow builds, or this number of hours rerunning the flaky tests, or when production went down for this amount of time because we didn't have a proper staging environment set up and we couldn't test things properly, that lost us this amount of money. And if you can put dollar signs in front of it, then you can usually, get the buy-in to focus on those sorts of things. If you're not on a platform team, it can also help to go ask the platform team for help, because like being on a platform team, we have the ability to kind of scale that out. So we're not just fixing one team's pipelines, but we could make changes that can scale up everyone's, make everyone's builds faster, more reliable. So finding ways to leverage that scale where you can say, okay, the platform team can help, fix these CI problems, which will enable the feature teams to do X, Y, and Z. Then you can kind of talk about those trade-offs that way.
I also think as a profession, we need to bear in mind that we are professionals doing a difficult job. And in a lot of cases, this question comes up for things like TDD as well. It's like we haven't got time and we need to ask permission to get time to do it. But by doing it, you're freeing up your own time. So you can make a small investment and then use the time you win back from that small investment to reinvest again and fixing things like tests, build servers, deployment automation, observability all pay you back in time. So you put an hour in, you get time back, you put that time in, and you get increasing amounts of time to improve this stuff. And if my plumber came to me and said, "Oh, I wanted to use copper pipes here, because if I use these plastic pipes, they're not as good and the joints aren't as strong," I'd be like, "Why are you telling me this?" I'm like, I trust you. I've paid you to come and do my plumbing. I would like a quality outcome. You don't have to ask me permission on what pieces to use. And if there's a regulation that says you have to put in these isolator valves, I'd expect you to just do it. Like, don't come and say, "Oh, should I follow the regulation and put in isolator valves?" It's like your job as a professional is to know all of that and just make it happen.
Yeah, I think this is an end thing. Kind of like Steve and both of you said need to apply at the same time. I really like what Brand said because I think it's something that we don't do enough of. We don't justify, I think, even like the existence of some of our teams. I've been in a situation where the existence of the platform team wasn't well, communicated, and then there was a layoff, and we lay off a large amount of platform team. And surprise, the speed or flow, whatever you want to call it, went down. So it's kind of like I think it resonated a lot with me. Thank you for sharing, Paul. Maybe let me think about where we want to go. I'm keen to understand what systemic shift open to you, not just tooling tweaks, will materially improve feedback speed today. It's kind of like, if you think globally, not necessarily tooling, what will help? Steve, you want to give it a go, and then we see.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think one of the big untapped resources that we all have available to us is user feedback. I've worked in a lot of organizations where, as a developer, the idea of you speaking directly to the people using the software was almost like, "What are you thinking? Go and sit in your basement, man." But we now know that, like, connecting that up, so developers are sitting with real users of the software, seeing how they use it, having conversations, makes you a high performing product team. And even if you're slightly slower in terms of deployment frequency and lead times, that user centricity actually brings your performance up to like the highest levels. So I think at the moment there's so much conversation about flatline speed that this user centricity part is missing, and that's like a gold mine of untapped resource that we should be looking at.
I think that's really true, and especially when you have, internal teams whose customers are other engineering teams, like the platform teams or the dev tools team, or those sort of internal teams. Like, we've been focused a lot at Mapbox on how to improve communication, between platform and our customers. And I think really, when you're talking about internal teams, there's no excuse because these people are, at the next desk or the next Slack channel over. So finding ways to get that feedback from your customers, like you can't not do it. The other thing I think is interesting is kind of cultural feedback loops where we're not just thinking about how do we make our CI pipelines better, but how do we make our overall work processes better? So doing stuff like retrospectives with the team to just talk about, like, hey, how is work going for everyone? Are there things that are going well? Are there things that are going not well? What could we be doing better to work together? Especially when you have these, it's all about the DevOps. How do we make sure that we're working together as effectively as possible and tightening up all of those feedback loops, whether they're technical or not?
And putting the action items from your retro onto the same task board that you put all of the other work. That's probably the biggest mistake I've made throughout my whole career, is forgetting to actually write that stuff down to make space for it.
And building on that Ren said about listen to our customers, like we are from platform and listen to our customers. I think doing these surveys is really insightful when we are developing or maybe tweaking those little things that makes the daily work more enjoyable, I would say. It's not like a pressure and the day that I know this is slow again, so I can tweak this and this we can have this feedback from our customers. I would say that we should treat as we as platform engineers, we should treat the platform as a product and our customer as our real customers, doing these surveys, these rattles, and have these actionable items.
And to all of my friends in the platform engineering world, that does mean you can't just decide what is good for people. Like, I know that like platform engineers are often the people that have the most experience with these pieces, which is why they're in platform engineering now. But yeah, don't be overconfident that you know what is needed. You have to connect it back to real needs.
Yeah, I mean, another spicy take here is that it's natural that ideally, if the platform wasn't mandatory, you will see exactly if actually what you build if fit what people want to use it for, because people will just do it themselves. But it's challenging where the only avenue to do some stuff is by that platform, because then it doesn't force the people that are building the tool to think hard about like what's the right abstraction level, what is the right way to onboard people, and so on. So I think it's an interesting challenge, especially for large and cost like heavy platform where actually everybody doing what they want is not an easy option. So I appreciate that. And Ren, I have another thing I wanted to run by you. That is, how you design feedback loops so that they don't just so that basically remain sustainable and human for teams. I think it's also like sometimes we go, maybe we talk a bit when we talk about metrics, but sometimes we go a bit overboard. So, what's your take?
Yeah, I think it's like I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'll say it forever. We have to remember that we are solving problems for people, not for computers, not for metrics. So thinking about what are we actually trying to accomplish? Like I sometimes I have to, be a customer who writes into customer service myself, and you can kind of tell as a customer when somebody is being judged on the metric of how quickly they close the tickets, because that's when you get the copy paste response that doesn't answer your question, but it came in 30 seconds, and you can tell what that metric is, and you can tell that that is not a happy person who is probably having a great time at their jobs. And I think, yeah, it's important to remember the human side of things. So for managers, keep tabs on how your teams are doing, how fulfilled people are. Listen when people are saying like this isn't working, this isn't sustainable, and find ways to try and make those improvements as much as you can. I think celebrating the wins, like we talked about the champagne earlier, and especially for internal teams like platform teams that are often just seen as a cost center. That's like, what do we even have them for? We could just, outsource that to ChatGPT, right? So being able to find ways to share like, hey, these are the wins, like this is what we did for our customers, on the other dev teams. This is what we did that's valuable. So you can share that within the org, which not only helps you celebrate the wins, but also kind of shows the value that you bring to the org that might otherwise just be invisible. Because I think we tend to have one of those jobs where if you're doing it really well, nobody notices that you exist.
Yeah, and you can be really lightweight in checking in on how developers feel. I'm pretty sure I'm stealing this idea from Jim Benson, where he said each card that you complete, just draw a face on it, like a smiley face or an unhappy face or a meh face, and you can get a really good temperature check of how the team is doing. And as leaders, we have to be super careful that we don't explain away when people aren't feeling great. It can be tempting to kind of put a narrative around it or say, oh, that person is quite negative or whatever, but actually they're sending signals. The reason you're having to explain it away is because they're almost like waving and saying help. So dig deeper and try not to just rationalize why people aren't happy. Go and find out what you could do to improve that situation.
Yeah, makes sense. And I started seeing a couple of questions coming from the audience. So what I would like to do is to try to get the last one of our question that I have, and then I wouldn't mind to respond to one, and then we leave the other for Slack, if it's okay with you all. Should we do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Francine, I would love your take. So let's say if we're advising a leadership team today, what leading indicator would you track to know whether your feedback loops are healthy? I know we talk about like the peril of measuring, but it's like if you had to do it, what would you measure?
I would focus on lead indicators that show how fast and how safely the system learns. From, for example, a quantitative perspective, I track things like build time, test retries, flake tests, and automated rollbacks. If those start increasing, I'd say feedback is slowing down or becoming less reliable. But if only the numbers are not enough, I would pay attention to the qualitative signals. If engineers start normalizing friction, as we talk about, or creating workarounds, that's an early warning signing that something isn't healthy. So I would pay attention in these kind of indicators.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me get like a question that I quite like, and then we get the other one in the channel. The question is, there are so many feedback loops. Are we building the right things? Are we building it right? Are the tests passing? How is the runtime performance? How is the team morale? And so on. Since it's almost impossible to do them all at the same time, which feedback loop do you leave for last and why? So obviously, like,
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I always look at these feedback loops like an onion. So the developer's inner loop is in the middle, which is when you write one small line, one small change, and you want to make sure that the software still builds, the test still pass. There's like a little loop there. And that's helping to guide you, right? And you're probably adding tests as you go as part of that because you're asking for a change. So you're either editing a test or adding a new test. And then you kind of like go out a little bit, and now there is someone that isn't you now giving you feedback on it. Maybe there's a code review and they're pointing out that you've opened a transaction way too early, and that's going to cause performance problems. And then there's another layer outside of that where maybe someone does some exploratory testing and they're like, well, the way that this form works is confusing. I think users are going to trip up on this. And so it kind of keeps going outwards all the way to even past the user feedback. Users can say, I love using the app. And then there's a even wider piece of feedback, which is, are they paying an amount of money, which allows you to stay in business, right? So, which is like the ultimate feedback is, what does the bank balance look like for your organization? And how's that trending? So that's
thank
kind of
you.
how we prove end to end that we are doing something valuable in the world.
Thank you, Steve. We run out of time, so I need to close. But let's follow up on Slack because I think there are a lot to say about the topic. So I wanted to thank you. We didn't just talk about like sandwiches and tacos. We really talk about like feedback loops and how to tackle them. I wanted to thank you, Ren, Steve, and Francine. It was generally like a very rich discussion, and it really brought me joy and a lot of very good ideas. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.